Every Tuesday and Friday, GZERO's Signal newsletter highlights some of the fascinating hard numbers defining our world. CBSN contributor and newsletter writer Willis Sparks is here to take us through some of the latest numbers today. Thanks for joining us. So we're going to start with an appropriate number considering all that we've been talking about today, 17.
Well, actually, you know, there's so much focus on Moon and Kim, but there are other interesting meetings going on today. Like Merkel is visiting Trump, Angela Merkel, the German chancellor.
Yes.
And the other one is, I think, maybe the most interesting meeting in some ways, is that Chinese President Xi Jinping is meeting in Wuhan, China today with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So let me throw three stats at you that tell the stories of the three meetings.
Right.
The first stat is that South Korean authorities estimate that there is a hacking attack from North Korea once every 17 seconds.
Oh my goodness.
Now, does that stop with peace and the normalization of relations?
Probably
we'll
not.
see.
Yeah.
Okay. On Merkel being in Washington, and we obviously saw French President Macron here also, 375. In the year after the Iran nuclear deal was agreed in 2015, Iran's exports to Europe increased by 375%. A lot of European companies doing business in Iran. The point here is this isn't just a security question. It's an economic, it's a commercial, it's a trade question that Macron and Merkel are trying to help Trump understand where their interests lie. Third, in terms of the Chinese president and the Indian prime minister, if you go back to 1980, China and India had economies virtually the same size. About $200 billion. Today, China's economy is 6 times larger than India's. That's where they've gone over the last almost 40 years now. China has a $12 trillion economy. India's at about $2 trillion. It's a huge gap that has opened up between China and India, and it affects all the issues that the two leaders are going to be talking about this weekend.
I'm curious about that meeting. What's the nature of that meeting? Is it primarily about trade, or is it about other things?
Well, it's a less formal meeting than we're seeing in Korea. It's more of an informal meeting. They've got a lot to talk about. There was actually a border standoff last year over a boundary issue involving Bhutan, where Indian troops and Chinese troops ended up staring each other down, and there are actually video of these guys throwing rocks at each other, literally. It's crazy. So there's all kind of border tensions that are a very old story in Chinese-Indian relations. China's investment plan, the Belt Road Initiative, India is very concerned about this. They feel like they're getting encircled, and that China's building this big economic relationship with Pakistan that's making the Indians very uncomfortable. China's becoming a much bigger presence in the Indian Ocean. So basically, this is about relationship building between the Chinese president and the Prime Minister of India, who are very strong-willed people, just trying to manage all of these potential tensions and to see maybe where they can begin to work together a little bit.
Oh, that's interesting. All right, now we got a couple, no, we're not domestic yet, but okay, 1,186.
The United States has apparently dropped 1,186 bombs in Afghanistan in the first 3 months of this year, which is significant because it is the largest number of weapons dropped during the first quarter of any year in Afghanistan, going back to the actual war fighting in 2003. So it's just an intensification of the fighting. President Trump is saying—
Is there headway?
Well, you know,
that's the question, right?
Yeah, and I think that's an open question right now, that there isn't a lot of headway, but President Trump's view is if we're going to have the troops there, then we need to change the situation on the ground because we can't stay there forever. So the U.S. is becoming more aggressive. As the weather gets warmer, there's going to be more fighting in Afghanistan. That's a place where when you get to the spring thaw, the Taliban become more active. The other number is a U.S. domestic story, which we talk a lot about inequality, whether wealth inequality, income inequality. Here's another stat. American women in the top 1% of income earners live an average of 10 years longer than women in the bottom 1%. And for men, the difference is 15 years, according to a study by the American Medical Association. There's nothing surprising about the fact that there's a gap because, you know, if you have more money, you can afford better health insurance, better health care. But the size of the gap really surprised me. 10 years for women and 15 for men. That is a big difference in the most basic quality of life question that we have in this country and in any other country.
Yeah, I think that that's a discussion that has not been happening. The distance between the haves and have-nots in terms of life expectancy, that you can live in this country, be born and raised in this country, and have a life expectancy of somebody in a developing country that doesn't have access to anywhere close to the level of health care that we have here. I think that's sort of despicable.
Health insurance has fallen out of the U.S. political debate, but as we get closer to the midterm elections, Democrats are going to want to talk a lot more about it. And then we pivot in November toward the 2020 presidential election. And I'm sure that health insurance is going to be, you know, it's going to be central to the debate again.
Definitely. Willis Sparks, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And you can check out all of these stories and the hard numbers by subscribing to the Signal newsletter. Sign up for it at GZEROmedia.com.